Okay, hello and welcome everybody to this second ever event of PHO2, the new joint research seminar of the Center for the Philosophical Studies of History and the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography. PHO2 stands for Oulu Ostrava or Ostrava Oulu Research Seminar in the Philosophy of History. My name is Georg Gange and I will be today's moderator. More importantly, today's speaker is Gunnar Schumann from the University of Hagen in Germany with the topic on historical explanation and anti-causalist account. Gunnar's main research interests lie in the philosophy of history, and here especially the question of causal or non-causal or perhaps anti-causal explanations in analytic epistemology and in ordinary language philosophy. Now, of Gunnar's many publications, I only want to mention here a few that have a direct bearing on today's topic. For one, there's the book Historical Explanation and Anti-Causalist Approach, which really bears the same title as today's talk and which came out last year with Routledge. Then there's the paper Can Normic Laws with R, Normic, save Hempel's model of historical explanation, question mark, a critique of Schurz's approach from 2019, which was published in the Journal of Philosophy of History, of Philosophy of History. And finally, Gunnar also edited a book on the topic, which came out in 2019 with Routledge, which is Explanation in Action Theory and Historiography, Causal and Teleological Approaches. As I said, it's the second event in the spring cycle of our new PHO2 seminar. After today, we'll still have three events. Today, 3 weeks, we will have Jamie Elders from Tufts University in the US speaking about astronomy, cosmology, and the distant past. Then on May 29, we have Arthur Alfaiz Assis from the University of Brasilia in Brazil, speaking on Koselik and the concept of history. And finally, on June 17, Gregory Reddick from the University of Leeds will be speaking about From Cleopatra's Nose to Darwin's Nose, G.P. Bury, History, Science, and Contingency. And more information about these events will be published in a timely manner on our social media account about the event in 3 weeks or next week. Now, if you want to stay updated about both of our centers' activities, I suggest you follow our social media accounts. The Center for the Philosophy of Historiography has Blue Sky and soon also Facebook, and the Center for Philosophical Studies of History has these two too, and in addition to that, X, formerly Twitter. There are many other events that are organized by both centers individually. So, and to know about them, look up our social media. I'm only going to name one of them in a bit more than 2 weeks. On April 14, the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography in Austria will organize the workshop Pragmatist Philosophy of History, Fioni Matikukanen, who's also in the audience here today. This event will be only in person, so you will have to come to Ostrava if you want to join, but everybody is very welcome. Now, finally, before I give the word to Gunnar, please mute yourself during the talk to avoid any unnecessary disturbance. And after the talk, there will be a discussion session that I will also moderate. I think Gunnar will speak about 45 minutes. If you have any question or criticism in the discussion session, please indicate so in the chat. I will make a speakers list. When it's your turn, you can speak up either with or without your camera on, or you can write your question in the chat and I will read it out loud. And we will prioritize people who haven't spoken yet, so they move up on the speakers list. That was it from me already. Thank you very much all for being here, and thank you especially Gunnar. The floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, Jörg, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the invitation to deliver a talk here. Now let me see if I can. Okay. Okay. Now, can you see something? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Now let me just... Okay. Okay, as you can see, the title of my talk today is going to be on historical explanation and anti-causalist approach. And here we have an overview of what's expecting you. In the first section, I'm going to say something about causalism in action theory, the most widespread and mainstream position, so to speak, in the philosophical discipline of action theory. Then I'm going to say something about what it means to explain on the notion of explanation in general. I will then say something about the case of explanation of actions in particular, and it's only in the fourth part that I will tackle historical explanations, so please stay tuned. The fifth part, I think not going to have time enough to talk about that here. So, but anyway, the ideas I present to you in the following are much more developed in detail in my recent book, Historical Explanation and Anti-Causalist Approach, which, as Georg already said, came out last year, was published with Routledge, and here you have a table of contents. Apart from the introduction, the book is divided into three parts. The first is concerned with the subject matter of historiography and the concepts of explanation and causation, whereas the second or the third one is about action theory. And then I apply the results of the second and the third chapter towards historical on historical explanations in the fourth chapter and draw some conclusions. Okay, now let me introduce you to causalism first, the view that I am opposing in action theory. As I said, my book connects a theory of historiography with a philosophical action theory. And a philosophical action theory is, as you know, the discipline which is concerned with the concept of action, of course, on the one hand. What are actions? What are intentional actions? How can we distinguish them from mere involuntary behavior, for instance? And on the other, it's concerned, of course, with the appropriate form of explanations of actions. Now, one might wonder why this is a topic at all, because usually we explain actions by reasons in everyday discourse. You know? For instance, we say it was because that Jane wanted to buy a new hat that she went into the store. Those explanations, reasons explanations, are also called teleological explanations. But now, causalists say that explanations that those reasons explanations by themselves, taken by themselves, are scientifically suspicious. Reasons explanations use intentions and beliefs in order to explain the action, but those explanations might be untrustworthy when given by the agents. Furthermore, they are unanalyzable and they are hard to quantify, and it's not really possible to base predictions on them, or those predictions are at least much less far-reaching than causal explanations, such that teleological explanations in general have to be replaced by scientific explanations, by causal explanations. And this has been a tendency in the history of philosophy already since the early modern period, when the scientific revolution took place with Galilei and Newton and all that, and had its impact on philosophy with thinkers like Descartes and Hobbes, of course, Spinoza and Hume, and is still prevalent somewhat today in today's contemporary analytic philosophy, especially. As I said, causalism is a mainstream view. And yeah, causalism says, as one of its proponents puts it, Alfred Mealy, that our actions are essentially events that are suitably caused by mental items or neural realizations of those items. Causalists traditionally appeal to such goal-representing states as desires and intentions, or their neural realizers, in their explanations of human actions. Now, this not only concerns, of course, individual actions, but also collective actions. One can, and yeah, this has some truth to it, because one can actually detect statistical regularities in human behavior, either in large groups and or over time. So it seems therefore somewhat not natural to assume that collective human actions are causally determined as well. Now, the goal of this transfer of the methods of physics to the human realm is to elevate the sciences of man, namely historiography, sociology, economics, and so on, to the rank of sciences in the strict sense, or even to secure their scientific character in the first place. This was more or less the explicit program of the 19th century positivism, as we can find in Kant and Mill, for instance, but also of the neo-positivism in the 20s and 30s of the Vienna Circle, and other thinkers as Karl Popper or Carl Gustav Hempel. And it was the latter, especially, who developed a certain according model of explanation, the famous deductive nomological model of explanation, or covering law model. You probably know about, of course, which states that the explanation of an event consists in finding two premises, or presenting a syllogism that consists of two premises, and the first premise again consists of a set of laws, of general laws, and the second premise states some specific conditions. And the first and the second premise taken together, they make the conclusion necessary, so to speak. The event, the explanandum, follows from then. You can actually logically derive the explanandum from them. Now, of course, the deductive nomological model, as it is called, was criticized. There was a certain type of criticism that stated that it doesn't seem to catch the meaning of causation proper, but especially it was especially seen as inept for historiography, because it was said that there seemed to be simply no strict laws when it comes to human actions, such that post-Hempelian theories of historical explanation, which try to defend the causalist model of explanation, try to develop the DN model further, and assume that that the DN model shouldn't use strict laws between cause and effect. So, for instance, that the general laws and the first premise should rather express non-strict regularities. So you can assume them under the non-strict regularities approach, if you will. There were other approaches that said, okay, we have to take another concept of causation, not the regularity one, but a counterfactual approach, for instance. And there's also the social mechanism approach, which explicitly states that human actions have to be causally explained. But also the narrative approaches of today often are simple causal approaches, and of course also the pluralist approaches, such that one can say that causalism is still the dominant view in philosophical action theory and in the theory of historiography. Now, causalism seeks to integrate human actions in the scientific worldview. You know, that you actually have the picture that the world is stratified in layers, and that each higher layer can be reduced to the underlying one, at least in principle, such that causal relations governing the lower layer determine the causal relations of the higher ones. And so you get the most basic layer, which physics is concerned with the elementary particles, the most general laws of the material universe, upwards via chemistry and biology, behavioral science, psychology, up to social science and historiography. And even if no global laws are to be found in historiography and the social sciences, then, so the view, hopefully at least micro laws of actions that confirm the principal causal explainability of human conduct can be found. And in one or the other form, you can find this view in the writings of Auguste Auguste Comte, for instance, John Stuart Mill, also Wilhelm Wundt, and the unity of science movement of the Vienna Circle, as already mentioned. But also it's an implicit premise, I think, in psychohistorical approaches, or there are even disciplines nowadays that call themselves neuroeconomics, which try to explain the economic behavior of individuals by neurological conditions. Now, I'm going to argue that explanations of action of people, of men, are not causal but teleological, and this will have profound implications for disciplines that deal with human actions, and especially historiography and the social sciences. But please note that my goal is not to say that historians should not speak of causes anymore, or that they should not use causal vocabulary. I only want to show that the meaning of cause and causal vocabulary is much different from that in the natural sciences. That brings us to the second section. What does it mean to explain? Now, if one considers the concept of explanation, we will find that to explain can mean a lot of different things. For instance, we can explain what a thing is for, what role it plays, what its function is, for instance. Then we can explain what a word or a phrase means, for instance. We can also sometimes explain in showing that matter that was perceived as unusual is not unusual, it's quite common. Yeah. To explain can also mean to justify something, or to give an excuse, for instance. Sometimes to explain can mean to fill in details. When I get asked, for instance, how did you get home last night? I can say, yeah, well, first I took the bus, and then I took my bike, and then I walked, for instance. Then I'm just filling in details and explaining how I got home, how it was possible for me to get home. Sometimes an explanation consists in a reclassification of an action, for instance, or a redescription. Why are you laying on the sofa? I'm doing yoga, for instance. This here we have an explanation which consists in the redescription of my laying on the sofa. And of course, we have explanations that are based on previous conditions, as in causal explanations, for instance, or the intentional or teleological explanations. Now, I do not claim this list to be exhaustive, and maybe the distinctions are not always sharp and or sharply drawn, but here we have a comprehensive list. And all I want to say that you can find all of those types of explanation in historiographical texts. Now, but if you do want to classify some explanations, you can do so in accordance to interrogation pronouns and distinguish what explanations, for instance, from how possible explanations from why explanations. And we already saw that what explanations sometimes historians have to explain what the role of certain objects of certain insignia, for instance, play in a coronation ceremony, for instance, or what a Latin phrase in a medieval text on law means, for instance, and how possible explanations also occur in historical texts when, for instance, archaeologist is concerned with the question how it was possible for the builders of Stonehenge to move such heavy stones, for instance. And then, of course, you have why explanations. So all I want to say here is, first of all, that explanations have not one logical form as Hempel and his followers thought. You see, it's not all of them fulfill the DN form, of course. And even if we only confine ourselves to why explanations, even those are not a monolithic block. And I want to show this in showing that the questions which we answer with why and because do not always have causal meaning. Now, when we consider the why explanations of actions, I would like to propose that they have to have an argument form. Just like an explanation for a belief, for instance, must be given by an argument as well, by a syllogism, if you wish. Otherwise, it would always be possible that the premises of an explanation are true and the explanandum false, and then we would have a gap in the explanation. Now, reason explanations of actions consist, therefore, of at least two components, a volitional and a doxastic premise, and the whole syllogism is called practical syllogism, as you can see here. And it has the form that the first premise states the intention of an actor to do a certain action, and the second one states that the actor thought of a certain means that was necessary to do the intended action. Actor A intended to do Y, and second actor A believed that to do X is necessary to do Y. And from that you can derive the explanandum. Now, of course, in explanations that we give, usually not always both premises are explicitly stated, but if we were to make an explanation, an action explanation fully explicit, one would have to distinguish those two premises. Okay, so now as we saw, the relation between the premises and the conclusion of a practical syllogism for causalists would be causal, not logical, as you can see in the writings maybe of Donald Davidson or Al Neely. As I already said, for causalists, actions are caused by either mental states of actors or by their neural realizations. But here's my anti-causalist argumentation. The thing is, well, causalists of action might, in general, disagree on whether causality is a nomic or a counterfactual, or even another relation. But what they usually all accept is that the cause can be described and identified in a way that is conceptually independent from its effect. But the connection between an intention and its respective action is a conceptual one, not a synthetic one, not a contingent one. Our concept of intention is such that we would not ascribe an intention to an actor when she does not perform the relevant action, although she has the opportunity to do so. What do I mean by opportunity here? Well, a couple of things. Here's a list. For instance, that the actor is physically and intellectually capable of doing the action, and that the actor has the required skills to perform the action, and that the actor is not hindered by external factors, as, for instance, when she's tied up or blown over by a hurricane, or by internal factors, as when she's psychically paralyzed. And also that, if applicable, she does not lack the required equipment in order to perform the action. And also that she's not ignorant of her opportunity and has not forgotten about her intention when the time to act has come. In general, I want to say that it would make no sense to ascribe to a person an intention of doing X when she does not do X, although she has the opportunity to do X. In such cases, we would also not leave it undecided whether the actor has the intention to do X or not. Her behavior, if she doesn't act, shows that she has not the intention to do X. So we have no independent criteria of intention or goal ascription apart from the fact that the person performs the action when she can. Now, related to this is that it would be misconceived to think of the verbal expression of an intention as a report of an accompanying mental state that lies beyond the behavior. To say, I have the intention to do X is not the report of an inner occurrence in my mind. It's not on a par with, I have a table, whereas now the material object table is replaced by an ethereal mental entity. We don't describe ourselves when we say, I have the intention to do X. I have the intention to do X is, so to speak, no truth-apt statement. That is, it's not a statement that can be true or false. What can be true or false is that what can be believed and be doubted and investigated and found out and rejected and so on. But it doesn't make any sense to say, oh, I thought I intended A, but now I found out that I actually intended B. Or either I intend A or B, just let me recheck. So I have the intention to do X is normally the verbal expression of an intention, not a report of an inner occurrence. Now, do I want to say that the intention to do X is the same as doing X, or that we only may ascribe intentions after the action has been done? No. For one may be prevented in the performance of the action. But even then, the actor has to display some behavioral signs of her intention. For instance, becoming upset or struggling when being prevented from performing X, or she has to find an alternative way to perform X when the initial means is not available anymore, etc. That is, in general, she has to display signs which are typical in situations in which the execution of intention faces obstacles. So intention descriptions in the third person use require the action itself or preparatory steps undertaken to perform the whole action, or the struggle against obstacles to the action, so that the ascription of the intention to do X is dependent on some description of behavior which refers to the intended action. In other words, to have an intention to do X designates a complex form of behavior in a context and not the possession of a mental or neuronal entity. Let me illustrate the context, this context dependency of intention descriptions. Let's assume an aviation safety agency investigates a horrible plane crash in which all passengers and the pilot have died, and finds out that the pilot crashed the plane intentionally because he was suicidal. On what would this claim be based? Well, it would not be based on evidence of any neuronal or ethereal state in the mind of the pilot, of the actor, prior or during to the action, but it would be based on contextual criteria. For instance, that the pilot had the required skills to fly a plane. It was not incapacity that led to the crash. And furthermore, that there was no technical necessity to descend the plane. Furthermore, that the pilot was not forced to descend by weather circumstances or by someone else. He was alone in the cockpit. Furthermore, the cockpit door was locked from inside and was not opened despite people banging on the door, as the flight recorder revealed later. The flight recorder also revealed that the pilot was not unconscious or incapable of controlling the aircraft. And also, the pilot had rehearsed the descent in the days before the crash. Or the pilot had gathered information on the internet about suicide possibilities and about the safety mechanisms of cockpit doors in advance. And also, it was found out that the pilot had previously documented depressive phases. Now, it's contextual behavioral criteria like these, on the basis of which we actually determine whether a certain action was intentional or not, when there is no possibility of asking the actor and the witness of the actor's action anymore. That means, in general, we take criteria like we ask questions like, was it a complex action? Maybe one that took a lot of effort, so that doing it by accident must be ruled out. And how did the actor perform the action? Did he display a lot of did he perform it very meticulously, for instance, very painstakingly? What did the actor say during the action or before the action? What did he do before? What after the action? Did he plan or prepare the action? Did he announce it? Was he surprised while doing it? Did he show remorse or satisfaction or indifference after the action? And also, did the action fit to the actor's character and his general interests, aims, and character traits? Also, did the actor justify her action before or afterwards? And also, did the actor repeat the action on other similar occasions? We take criteria like these in order to decide whether an action was intentional or not. And those criteria are quite homespun and very familiar to us from our everyday intercourse. We use them also theoretically in everyday explanations of actions. Now, especially when it comes to actions that are reactions to natural events or reactions to actions of other people, the temptation is great to equate these relations with ordinary cases of causal connection. For instance, Hampel established an analogy between the offer of a bribe and the impact of a stone. But I want to say here that the sense of cause is very different from the notion of cause employed for natural phenomena, already as already Collingwood stated. For instance, when it is said that the speech of a representative causes the Speaker of Parliament to adjourn the House, then this is no compulsion independent of the ideas and intentions of the Speaker, but means that the Speaker of Parliament has willingly agreed. The words or deeds of the first actor made a certain action appear more eligible in the eyes of the second actor, as it would have been otherwise. The first actor then provides a reason for the second actor to perform the action by offering something positive, as in the case of bribery or reward, or something negative, as in the case of blackmail or threat. So, and so for human reactions to natural events, for instance, when a hiker is forced to return by a thunderstorm. Now, in everyday life, regarding the myriads of actions of our contemporaries, of no need for explanation occurs. We are familiar with many actions of our contemporaries, of course. But should it arise, should such a need for explanation occur, then we simply might observe the action's context firsthand or ask the actor about his reasons. Now, concerning the actions of the far past, we cannot ask our ancestors about the reasons for their actions. Also, it is more likely that we are unfamiliar with certain kinds of publicly observable behavioral expressions of beliefs and intentions, and thus do not know what an action was about. Also, it might be that the historical actor's purposes and or their means and beliefs might be unfamiliar to us. For instance, the belief that Judgment Day is near, as it was quite common in Europe in the early Middle Ages, for instance. But it can be a background belief like this that lets us understand puzzling historical action. For instance, why did that nobleman spend such large sums for the foundation of a monastery? And we understand this action then as one of piety or religious awe. Now, there's a certain rule of thumb here, namely that it gets harder to reconstruct the contexts of actions the older they are, because of the decreasing quantity and quality of historical sources. Historical actors only rarely stated explicitly what their intentions were, and even if they did, one would not always have to take them at face value. But historical actors displayed actions, the knowledge of which has come down to us today from historical sources by material of written records. Now, historians come through the bequeathed source data to get a picture as precise as possible concerning the context of past actions, and to reconstruct from it the intentions, goals, purposes, and beliefs of the historical actors. When reconstruction of the context of the action is not possible, historians will have to abstain from ascriptions of the reasons and purposes and intentions of the actors, and therefore from explanations. But in general, historical explanations work like everyday explanations of the actions of our contemporaries, such that it can be said that as the crossing of a street by a contemporary actor under certain publicly observable contextual conditions is the expression of her intention to go to work, so Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon is the expression of his intention to seize power in Rome under the historically transmitted, publicly observable circumstances of his action. It's not like this. It's not that the intention to seize power caused Caesar to cross the Rubicon, as Doris Gerber, for instance, argues in her book of 2012. Now, the source material which has come down to us today is therefore the basis from which the historian derives the goals and intentions of historical actors, and by way of which further actions of the historical actors can be interpreted. So to explain an action by a reason is not to refer to a previous mental state, which is thought of as a human cause of it, but to embed the action in a context, so that it can be understood what the actor went after. And often, by this, it will be understood what the action was, in fact. In particular, this is the historian's task when some actions of historical actors are not immediately understandable. For instance, as you are certainly familiar with, the Roman Emperor Caligula once appointed his favorite horse senator. And there is a short little book by the historian Alois Winterling, in which the historian explains this act, that Caligula did this to humiliate the senators of Rome as a part of his wider intention or his wider goal to consolidate the still somewhat shaky sovereignty of the emperor against the Senate. And now here we can understand what the action was in fact. Caligula's appointing his horse senator was a humiliation of the senators, an expression of Caligula's attitude of, I can appoint senator whom I want, and also to show the senators that they were no better than animals. And it was not the act of a lunatic, the erratic act of a lunatic, as later Roman Republican-minded historiographers saw it. Yeah. And this also holds for the explanation for historical artifacts, not only actions. For instance, plague masks. They may be explained by historians of medicine, by the past people's belief that they could protect themselves from infection of the disease by breathing through beaked masks filled with odorous essences. In general, historians love details, but not because their genuine method consists of describing the particularity of their subjects, as Windelband and Rickert held, but because the reconstruction of the intentions, goals, purposes, and the beliefs of historical actors requires good knowledge of the details of the situation and the context of the historical actors' actions. For only then that historians can decide whether there was an overarching intention or purpose in the performance of a particular action, and if so, what it was, and so for their means and beliefs. Well, this account of historical explanation is generally in line with what Droysen and later Croce, Collingwood, Ray, and von Wright basically wanted to say against the numerous attempts to make a science of historiography by importing the causal methods of explanation from the natural sciences. Now, historians do often speak of causes of historical events and of past human actions. Speak of the causes of the French Revolution or the causes of the World War I, for instance. But this is only because in everyday language, of which the historians make use, we don't usually differentiate strictly between reasons and causes. Both terms can be used interchangeably in several contexts. So we, respectively, the historians may speak of causes of an event and also of the reasons for a physical event, for instance, an explosion. Still, and nonetheless, there is a conceptual distinction to be made here. the spark may have been the reason for the explosion of the gunpowder barrel, that is its cause, but it was not the reason for the gunpowder barrel to explode, of course. And likewise, the drought did not literally make the Dust Bowl farmers move to California, to pick up a famous example of Carl Gustav Hempel. Instead, the drought changed the conditions for the farmers so that they had to achieve their life goals in another way. And those life goals have not been something very exotic or alien to us, but are known and shared by nearly all members of our life form. These goals are so natural and may be taken for granted that they are often not stated explicitly in historical explanations. Often only the prominent change is stated in an explanation, so that the impression of a nomic or a causal connection between droughts and migrations might occur, or between wars and migration might occur. That it was the drought that drove the people from their houses. But the explanatory work is not provided by a relation of strict or loose regularity or any other account of causality between droughts and migration. The explanation, when we explain the moving away of the people by a drought, remains a teleological one, although there even might be a regularity between droughts and migrations. The explanations of a certain historical outcome are actions that changed the conditions faced by another actor and thus shaped her intentions and means and beliefs. As you can see here, I present to you the zigzag model developed by Georg Henrik von Wright in his 1971 explanation and understanding. And here you can see that a certain historical explanation, the outbreak of the First World War, if one wishes to explain this by the assassination of the Archduke of Austria, then this is in fact a series of related events which are the actions and reactions of actors. This zigzag model represents simply iterations of atomic intentional explanations, that is, of practical syllogisms that led to actions and reactions by the actors. And also thus it comes as no surprise that the zigzag model will often take the form of a story in historiographic literature. And I think it is this fact that seems to account for the appeal of narrativism and why narrativism has found so many supporters within contemporary theory of historiography. But usually, none of the proponents of narrative explanations goes as far as to point out the non-causal intentional character of its components. When narrativists address the problem of causation in historiography at all, which they do rarely enough, they simply assume that the connections between events are causal. And also in social historiographies, for instance, like industrialization or modernization, secularization, gentrification, and so on, often no specific actors occur explicitly, but of course, actions and intentions and means and beliefs in general. Even such a typical social historical explanation of alleged actorless processes like industrialization are ultimately explanations of myriads of individual and collective actions and rest on purposes and aims. For example, when the stepwise substitution of manual labor by machine-based production over a time span is explained by the interests of the manufactory owners or by the increased demand of a growing population. So to be clear once more, I do not claim that historians should solely pay attention to great individuals and their intentions and beliefs, and that all matters of historiography can be explained by the reasons for actions of great individuals. And historians also may speak on of causation and even use vocabulary as mechanism, for instance. But this talk must not be taken by theorists of historiography at face value. That is, the mechanism is understood in a literal sense, as it is understood in physics. In fact, such a mechanism, social mechanism, is in fact a series of intentional actions that lead to the outcome, not a blind mechanism in the literal sense. Okay, this is the end, and I'm grateful for your attention.
All right. Thank you very much, Gunnar. You also kept very well to time. Not everybody can do that. Okay, now it's time for the discussion session. As I said, is there anybody immediately with some, I'm sure there's questions and comments. So who wants to go first? Yes, there's a question in the chat. Um, okay, if nobody wants to speak first, we can also go with the question from the chat first. I'll read it out loud so that we have it also on the recording. The question asks, it's a rookie question, but it doesn't matter. They say, do you think we can grasp the same truth values in history of other than human animals and objects as in human history? To understand human actions and intentions, we need to consider contemporary cultural, social, psychological, etc. perspectives. And in non-human actions, we need ethological knowledge. Is there an imbalance of truth values between human and non-human history, or can they hold the same value when the historical sources are usually anthropogenic? Okay.
Just let me reread some. I think we can. Well, the thing is, I was talking about human actors mainly, but what I said can be extended somewhat to higher mammals, of course, and organisms in general, or beings for which a certain degree of intentionality holds. So there might be something like the history of, school of apes or what have you, that learn to use certain tools and stuff like that. Yeah, but only, of course, in a very confined sense. Yeah, so we may ascribe some degrees. Intentionality is a concept that comes in degrees and is applicable in degrees. So for higher animals, I would say, okay, there is something like intentionality, and we can say that, um, the monkey wanted to do that, and he believed that, and stuff like that. Yeah. So there might be something like this. Yeah, possible. But yeah, and this is also important because the history of mankind, the longest time span of human history was, of course, pre-Neolithic, in a pre-Neolithic state, and we also have all the middle forms between apes and man, and they can be counted to history as well. But in general, of course, the source data are very thin, so that we can only, assume the most general aims of, survival and other stuff to tell their history, not very specific events or deeds, of course.
Okay, great. Thank you very much also for the question. Okay, anybody else? I mean, I would have a question too, but I'll first rather moderate instead. Okay, great. There's Timo Gitias perhaps, or Gitias? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. So I had well, first of all, very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I had a small question regarding intentionality, the notion of intentionality, because there are, of course, people saying that, okay, well, intentional action well, our actions are also determined or defined by structural forces and things such as that. So the intentionality of our actions is something that we can put a big question mark behind. How would you respond to that,
Yeah.
in light of your theory?
Mhm. Yeah, as I tried to mention, also reactions to structural conditions are still intentional actions. You see, there's always a little room, so to speak, for maneuver, for creativity, for So when I'm forced to hand over my purse, when I'm uh, point blank at with a gun, it's still an intentional action, of course. Yeah. It's not a total free action, of course, but still, it doesn't lack the criteria of intentionality. So there are what the so-called structural explanations are thus by no means agentless at all or intentionless at all. Structural explanations are not explanations that are on a par with causal explanations in the natural sciences, but still are the explanation of intentional actions under certain conditions, of course. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. We have two more people now on the speakers list, which is good. It's oh no, no, it's three. So it's first Yoni Mati, then David, then Jack, if I'm having it correctly. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you for such a clear talk. Really enjoyed it. I
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, but I begin with one, and it was very interesting when you showed this slide about many meanings of what explanation means, explanation, and now I'm wondering here, because that seems to be like you go some way to naturalize, naturalize the term explain. So it plays a lot of roles. There's several functions in our speech, unlike Hempel and others thought. But I didn't hear an answer. How would you approach? Because you then seem to be focusing on one type of explanation. So in what relation is this to other meanings of explain? So why wouldn't you naturalize all along and say that there are really multitude or variety of senses of explanation? Or is this what you are talking about? Is this somehow more
Yeah.
fundamental?
No, it's not. But when I gave you the list with the different meanings of explanation, I just wanted to point out that there are not only why explanations, there are also how possible explanations, for instance, or what explanations, of course. All I wanted to say that why explanations still, of course, are very important in historiography, and that even with why explanations, you can distinguish the causal sense and the reason sense, or the teleological sense, so to speak, and you have to distinguish them both, because to answer a why question is not always the same as presenting causes. That's all I wanted to say. You see. So my goal was not to neutralize the concept of explanation. Quite the opposite.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah, you can go later again. Maybe we've got a few questions now.
Yeah. Go on.
If you have,
Yes,
if
yes.
you have to follow up, yes, great.
Sure.
We also I saw
Thank you.
Václav, and I put myself on the list now too. But next it's David first. Sorry.
Hey, thank you very much for your talk. I think I have been able to recognize very strong inspiration from Georg von Wright. My question would be, because if I really look at what historians are doing, how are they writing, how are they arguing, they are usually combining multiple types of explanation on one topic. Why did why the Nazi Germany leadership attacked Soviet Russia? Well, there was some intention behind it, but of course there were but the intention was not to lose the war. The what happened, how the operation went, that's we are explaining something else, of course, and there we only can use causal explanation most likely. And usually if we want to have a full explanation of this process, this event, historians would generally use both types of explanation or multiple types of explanation combined to strengthen the arguments, I would say. But
If I,
but
yeah,
if I sorry, I would rather say that if I'm looking for how historians are explaining, they are using all the information channels they have. Sometimes you can have information about the intentions of the actors if it's written somewhere. Sometimes you don't have, so you opt for other types of explanation. So I think that would be pretty natural way how to.
yeah, well, no, I wanted to say that the historian's task is to, yeah, investigate the context of the action and to get a picture as detailed and precise as possible about the context of a certain action in order to derive the beliefs and the aims and intentions of the actors involved, right? And he has to do this, otherwise there is no alternative for him. He cannot you cannot come up with causal explanations. Causal explanations are explanations according to natural laws, and those are only available, so to speak, for natural phenomena. Sometimes historians use um, causal explanations in their writings, but then usually, for instance, when they say, okay, an over-fertilization of this soil led to soil degradation or something, but in those cases, they just make use of the results of natural sciences. It's not the task of the historian to conduct any natural investigations, of course. So yeah, a historian can point out what causal consequences a certain human action had. But the as I tried to show, the when an action formed the conditions of other actions, either of the actions of the actor himself or of other actors, this is not a causal relation. It is a relation in the end of yeah, intentionality. A certain action may shape the conditions to act for another agent, but this, of course, is then still a intentional explanation because the other actor just had to take those conditions into account, you see, in his beliefs. But it still is a practical syllogism. It is not it is not a causal relation that is based on laws, on general laws.
Maybe you have another question, David, or a follow-up, but we have a few people still. Okay,
Well,
so next is Jack, then it's myself, and then it's Václav.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for the talk, and I apologize if my question is I was a bit late to the talk, so you may have covered some of this. I was wondering about is it von Wright, von Ritz you mentioned, and how this idea of intentional action across time in a kind of sequential manner
Yeah.
can explain something like World War One. And so the first question I have is just, I suppose, maybe you could say more about that picture and how it differs from the kind of classic kind of Collingwood conception of historical explanation. And I have another question, but maybe I would just leave it at that and invite you to say a bit more, if that's okay.
Yeah. Shall we maybe put up the presentation again? Let's see. Right. Yeah. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Here, you were talking about this model here, down here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See, what you have is a series of actions. And the yeah, the dotted lines show how actions shaped the conditions to which the others actors responded. Yeah. You can find this in von Wright, of course, everything. So the assassination of the Archduke of Austria, that meant that, the Austrian government had to issue the ultimatum to Serbia. Otherwise, their influence on the Balkans would have vanished. And and they did this in a way they thought were appropriate, and that again led to the mobilization of the Russian army. There is no causal necessity here, if you wish. There is what we have here, what the relation between all those actions is that one intentional action shapes the conditions of the next intentional actions, and this is iterated over several stations. And it's just an example. I don't say that you have to explain the outbreak of the First World War by the assassination of the Archduke of Austria, but if you do so, then it is, of course, not a causal relation as we understand causal relations in natural sciences, but the iteration of atomic practical syllogisms concerning several stations of intentional actions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if am I allowed to follow up or.
If it's immediate on this, perhaps if it leads a bit elsewhere, I would suggest we take the other questions first that have been. Because there are two more in the queue for the moment.
Yeah, I suppose it does. I just. Oh, okay. I'll leave.
I didn't fully understand what you said, that there was a connection problem. Sorry, but we can come back to it. Okay, then next I sort of put myself on, and then it's Václav. I have a question. It relates to I think somebody who has done some very interesting work in this on this level, and what you say about it. So my question is, I guess the general question is, what do you think? Do you think Danto has solved some of the problems that you are speaking here about? And I'm gonna shortly elaborate what I mean by that. Because in the less read, the part that nobody reads of narration and knowledge, analytical philosophy of history, not the one on narrative sentences, Danto has this compatibilist approach for narrative, because narrative explanations and covering law or sort of explanation. And he says, of course, explanations are relative to a description, this kind of unscompian point. So depending if you describe some historical happening, maybe by a higher level of granularity, you explain it perhaps by regularities, or you can also explain it in more detail than explain it perhaps by narrative explanation. And he thinks they're compatible with each other. But that, if I understand it correctly, that goes strongly against your general project, because your general project is sort of to cleave apart actions from intentions. And even if you were to cleave them apart, so even if your general framework is sound, you could still have this compatibilist approach, right? Depending on what kind of description you are giving of the historiographic episode you want to explain. And given this in mind, you said in the end of your talk something like historiographic episodes are not explained by regularities, and that harkens back a bit to what Joni said. But by that, then you already have presupposed a certain notion of what actual proper explanation is, right? Because obviously, if you say whatever an explanation needs to do is given an information effect to the person which something is explained to, and the regularity perhaps does that just as well as an action explanation, right? On that level. And then
yeah. Can you repeat that last point?
Well, the question is just what's the substantive notion of explanation that you presuppose if you say a regularity doesn't explain a historical episode, whereas an action explanation does? There must be something you must have a substantive notion of what counts as a proper explanation.
Yeah.
And then I would
Yeah.
then I would also have a question, but we can put that for later, about the other
Okay.
the more famous point of Danto, that actually historiographic knowledge is always by hindsight. It's not depend on the intention of the actors and so forth and so. But that's a different point.
Yeah.
Maybe the compatibility and your concept of explanation. Maybe
Yeah.
if that is clear. I hope
Well,
it's clear enough.
yeah. Okay. Well, my concept of explanation is of an action explanation, of a why explanation of an action, of a human action, of an intentional action, is given by the practical syllogism, which consists of the two premises, and lets you derive the explanandum, and it does so in a, as I say, normative way. A reason explanation has to show why it was good in the eyes of the actor to act like he did, why it was called for, so to speak, why it was appropriate to act like that. Yeah, this is what a reason explanation has to show, you see, and this is not achieved by causal explanations and not by regularity explanations. For instance, when I take the umbrella and you ask me, why do you take the umbrella? And I say, well, there might be rain today, which implies all that talk of, well, it might rain today and I don't want to get wet. I want to avoid getting wet. So this explanation lets you see why I took the umbrella, but an explanation of the type, well, 73% of all people in a situation like me took the umbrella with him, does not explain why I took the umbrella with me, you see? It's not in the reason sense, of course. Yeah. So this is my concept of my substantial concept of reasons explanation. Yeah, and okay, is that all right for you?
Yes, the other point was about the compatibility of the explanations, as Danto has argued, but we can go ahead. I don't need to take too much time.
Yeah, one word to Danto. Danto is not really that much different from the DN model. In his book, his approach, I think, collapses into the DN model of Hempel.
Interesting claim, but I will read it up. Yes.
Yeah. I have a passage in my book
okay.
on that.
Okay, great. Looking forward.
Me?
Yes, sorry, Václav, you.
Hi. I agree with your argument, but I'm coming from more historian's perspective. So my question is that not always like history is always about events, right? Actions. A lot of time history is about ideas, mentality, cultural phenomenon, emotions. Do you think your theory could apply to those kind of non-action historical topics? And usually, like historians today are not only concerned about, reasons or explanations, causes, but more like, describing what was going on, what was the phenomena, and how it kind of changed along the time. So I'm just asking about the applicability of your theory.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
That's a
that's it.
very good question. And I think, of course, it is applicable to emotions and the history of ideas and all that. For instance, as I said, it's not only about reconstructing intentions or something, or aims and goals, but also of beliefs, for instance. And beliefs are also, past theories are beliefs. Theories of how illnesses spread, for instance, no? Past theories of how the Earth come into being, and on all stuff like that. All this is also the subject of the historian, and his task is to reconstruct beliefs often enough when they are not the same as we have commonly today, of course. And the other point about emotion, for instance, yeah, even emotional actions or actions that have, that come from emotions are intentional actions. Also, actions that are, the expression of wrath or guilt or what have you, shame or whatever. Those are still intentional actions, although they are accompanied by certain emotions, which may be quite strong, of course. For instance, revenge or something like that. Many actions unfortunately happened in history because of revenge and feelings like that. But they are totally not incompatible with the intentional actions approach that I try to present here today.
Okay, great, thanks. Next is Eugen.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting talk. I was wondering, maybe this is some kind of like clarificatory one. At some moments when you had this example of a plane crash, for instance, you emphasized the role of context, like how do we find out what happened and stuff like that. And also I think also in other examples, you emphasize the context is important, but in the other examples, you kind of underline that the theological approach is the correct one, like what we intend, like the actor intended Y, and that is why he did X. So I'm not sure whether I understand it correctly that you kind of contextual information is just a way how to find out more about intentions, or because it seems to me like these could be two competing approaches to explanation of action, like to focus on the context more and to focus on intention. And maybe if I may, I hope it's not another question, like in the case of the pilot, you mentioned that, well, he's not here, so we cannot ask him. But my question is like, anyway, even if he was there, so probably context would be important, right? Or not?
Of course. Actually, those are not opposed at all. They belong together, you see. In order to find out that it was an intentional action, we have to take all those contextual investigations into account. You see, all those contextual factors that I presented to you showed that the action, that the plane crash was intentional, right? And also showed why the pilot did so as he did. This was my everyday, so to speak, it's not an everyday example, of course, but a contemporary example. And we just have, the historian has to apply this to past actions and to the past, to the source data, which delivers to him, so to speak, the contextual information that he needs in order to reconstruct the aims and the beliefs of the past actors. They belong together.
Okay, maybe now there's nobody's hand up. Maybe it's now time for second rounds. If somebody who already spoke before wants to go again, I thought there were some people who.
I could go.
Yeah, Jori-Matti, please.
Yeah, I would like to ask this question. Maybe I misunderstand you, but it sounded that your project is reduction to individuals and individuals' intentional action, even in the cases of industrial revolution or any structural phenomena or bigger issues. And I feel a bit uneasy let's focus on the First World War case and the von Wricht's case about reducing it to a series of intentional actions. Then, okay, that might be possible in some cases. So it's an explanation, it's a form of explanation. But if we look at the literature of the origins of the war, we have some like Fritz Fischers who said it was a premeditated struggle for power. So I guess the Kaiser Wilhelm would be it's his intention, his guilt. But then there are a lot of other kinds of cases like H.C.P. Taylor, who says it's like an automatic trigger, and many others look at the long trajectories and a lot of phenomena. So it seems that it's no one's intention in some cases, or in some explanations that are used.
Yeah, but it does not belong to my premises that you can only explain actions that must have been, explicitly intended. Even if a historian is concerned with unintentional consequences of intentional actions, the full explanation of the event in question would consist in pointing out of which intentional action the unintended consequence it was. You see? So you can't do without intentional actions, although the event to be explained is not always the intended one, you see? And I also do not want to reduce collective intentionality or collective actions to individual actions. Also, collectives of people can have aims and can have beliefs, of course. I say something about it in my book, but I cannot quite present to you in full detail what I was saying there. But anyway, I tackle those questions as well in my book, right? Yeah, yeah, but I also discuss the point that, yeah, what if an historical event is the unintended outcome, so to speak, of intentional actions? And I think that explanation, the historical explanation of such an event must make clear what actors were there, what were they doing, and what consequences did their doings have, although the actors might not have been fully aware of those consequences.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. I saw Czech has raised hand, but there was a question in the chat first by Amanda. I'm going to read it out again so that the recording also has it. Consistency or sounding reasonable is key when we explain something. This should be a cause that easily turns into a teleological explanation in the case of causal explanations. Are there criteria for determining or distinguishing between teleological and causal explanations?
Yeah, as I said, causal explanations often are taken to be nomic relations between general laws and individual events. This is one, but the more general distinction is that causal explanations are synthetic statements, so-called synthetic statements. The cause usually must be determinable and identifiable independently of the effect. And this is not so for intentional or teleological explanations, as I tried to show in my talk. Some of the premises, the intention, and the action, they are related in a conceptual way, not a synthetic, if you wish. It's a conceptual statement, not a contingent one, not a synthetic one. This is the criterion to distinguish between teleological and causal explanations.
Okay, next is Jack again.
Sorry, my internet's slow, so hopefully this will be okay. So I just wanted to pick up on both responses to those questions. So you said that the criteria for distinguishing between cause and teleology is that the cause must be identifiable independent of its effects. And I'm wondering, like, if we take the case of science, whether or not it seems like science appeals to synthetic explanations, sometimes without being able to identify the mechanism, right? In the case of medicine, for example, you might have a syndrome or something,
Right.
rather than being able to identify a mechanistic account as to what's going on. And so then if we go and we ask the question about, okay, so we have unintended consequences, and you want to say that these unintended consequences must be explained in some sense by reference to intentions, then we take two historians, one, and they're both maybe explanations of the 2008 crash, one of which wants to go back to the intentions because the intentions explain the setup of some sort of economic system or perverse incentives or something. And another makes no reference to those intentions, but just sort of maybe describes, as economic historians do, like structural features. Those structural featural explanations might be couched in kind of the causal idiom, but why would that need to necessarily collapse back down into an intentional explanation? Why can't we just settle for a quite rough and ready causal explanation?
Yeah. Because, well, I think structural explanations are, in the end, nothing but very, very, very abbreviated teleological explanations, so to speak. Yeah, they take myriads of single actions in one concept, and they yeah make it seem as if we have a causal connection here. But in fact, this is just a surface phenomena. There would be no structures if there would be not enough intentionally acting actors, of course. All those cold social structures are in the end nothing but the result, maybe the mass effect result of myriads of intentional actions of people, right? There would be no institutions if it were not for people acting in a certain way. This must be the sense behind the word, the concept of institution. And so those explanations seem to be somewhat causal, seem to be somewhat based on regularities simply, but in the end they aren't.
Okay, we have another question from the chat.
I also tackle this in my book in a more detailed manner, of which I do not recall everything right now. Oh, I'm sorry.
We will all duly read your book.
Yes,
as we should have done beforehand. But no, the next question is from JJ Pavlovsky in the chat again, so read it out loud for the recording. I would have a question about the possibility of combining your approach with Paul Roth's Hearts of Darkness, Perpetrator History, and Why There Is No Why. P. Roth proposes utilization of the results coming from social psychology. I infer from your presentation that such knowledge would belong to the context layer of explanation, whereas, for example, anti-Semitism would belong to the reasons layer. How can the two be possible combined? Usually historians go for the Einers model. Do you believe that historical debates using sufficiency, insufficiency of causes or reasons are the right way?
No. The Einers model is, so to speak, just the DN model without strict laws, right? With statistical regularities. But as I tried to point out, the explanation is not the explanation of human actions. Why explanations of human actions are not based on any regularity, be it a strict one or be it a simple statistical probable one. Reasons explanations do have to render the explanandum as something that should have been done in the eyes of the agent, and they must let us see why the actor thought it was good to act in that way, and this is simply principally not provided by any DN or Reines model explanations, right? And Paul Roth, yeah, I'm not familiar, to be honest, with that text from Paul Roth, but there are others in which he says that, well, explanations don't even have to be, so to speak, logically valid. He argues against the Procrustean form of an argument, and I don't agree with him on that point. I think even a practical syllogism has to have some kind of argument form, of course.
Okay, I put myself on another time too for the second part of my question. Again, kind of related to Dante. I'm sorry for that, perhaps. But I understood from what you answered to Yoni Matti that you're not going for this reductivist claim, like maybe in one interpretation of calling what all history is history of thought, whatever that exactly means.
Like
There's
in
not,
the sense of a methodological
yeah,
individualist.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But still, you seem to be going for some kind of categorical claim that any sort of historiographic explanation is, on one hand, dependent on actions. Okay, people. That's, I think nearly everybody can agree to that. But it's also incomplete if there's not action or perhaps even intentions figure in the explanation, right? But then if we go with somebody like Danto with the famous narrative sentences and so forth, you could probably come up with a narrative sentence and their explananda in historiography, perhaps like inflation or inflation in the Roman Empire, where they did a lot of stuff, but none of them is as a result of their actions, but not of the result of their intentions of trading or whatever they did. And then you can come up with his narrative sentences that are far in the future of some past action, which see this action then as the cause for this future thing, also totally detached from the intentions. So it's of course that historiographic explanations need actions, but you can come up with counterexamples to the categorical claims that all historiographic explanations need to not even based on intentions, but even figure intentions if they're not based on them, because you have to understand any unintentional consequences through intentions. And that doesn't seem quite right. Well, is that the claim? I'm not sure if that made sense what I said, but this would be the question.
Look, when we are in need of an explanation, for instance, why was this person killed, for instance, we would not be satisfied with only a causal explanation in terms of, well, in the end, he didn't have enough oxygen in his blood veins, right? Yeah. And we would stop this or the total line of explanations would only stop at the first intentional action because he was killed by that guy with a knife or something like that. You see, this is usually that what is that what interests us from a historical perspective. Yeah. So with all the causal explanations of the intermediary steps and all that, other sciences are concerned with those. But when we ask from a historical perspective, we are asking, we have this explanation of intentional actions in our mind, I'd say.
You can give descriptions of actions in hindsight
Yeah.
that don't figure at all, that they don't at all care about the intentions that are being given. So they're not dependent on the intentions.
Yeah, you can do so, but still you deal with intentional actions, of course, right? No matter how they are
But not all the
described.
intentional descriptions. But not, yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay, but this would be the case in which an intentional action would have an unintended consequence, for instance, right?
Yeah, I don't relay the point. Maybe that's one. Is there somebody else still? Well, if not, then we can also. We have been here already for 1.5 hours, which is great.
Yeah.
I guess.
I feel grilled.
You really
Yoni
have
Matti.
answered a lot of questions very well.
Yeah.
That was quite
Okay.
a
Do
intense.
you have another question, Yoni Matti? Because you're
No, I don't. I don't. No,
Okay,
So
okay,
please,
then, okay.
I thought that you blowed the
to,
whistle.
to everybody, if you still come up with some questions or objections or anything, just please feel free to write me. I displayed my email address, but you can also ask Georg, for instance. So I'm really interested in your opinions and objections and whatever you have, right?
Okay, I guess it's a good final word for the
Chuck
for the
is raising
recording.
his hand.
But Jack is raising his hand. Another question? At the tail end? Okay, I'll stop the recording either way if there's a question.